Okay, so I guess it definitively is Sylvie. At least that's her name. Now, it could be Sylvie Daughter, that's entirely possible, or Sylvie Daughter, but I'm inclined to believe that it really is Sylvie Lushton, and that's kind of cool. Okay, so I have an idea here that I want to experiment on you guys with. On Comics Explained, we make these 20-minute long videos where I promise you'll walk away as a comic book expert on whatever character or team that we're talking about. And while I love doing that, I also recognize on here, a lot of you guys like the more condensed version, and then you can go check out those great big huge versions when you have the time to do so. So I want to kind of do a condensed version on Sylvie Lushton and then talk about the show and some of the stuff that really lends credence to the fact that it really is Sylvie Lushton. So Sylvie Lushton was a character who was basically created by Loki, and this comes out of a handful of different stories, right? It comes out of Avengers Academy, it comes out of Young Avengers, really Dark Reign Young Avengers, and then it comes out of Thor Ragnarok or Thor Disassembled. So the whole idea behind this with Thor Ragnarok, Thor Disassembled, whatever you want to call it, is that the long and short is Thor basically had to destroy all the Asgardians. The bigger story there focused on something called the Ragnarok cycle, which is actually destined to happen over and over and over again, because there are kind of these enigmatic beings called the ones who sit above in shadow that feed on the energy the Asgardians give off whenever they die. And so because they need that sustenance, the Asgardians are eternally locked in this loop where they basically experience Ragnarok till pretty much the end of all time, and then ultimately the universe is reborn and the cycle will begin over again. And so in order to end that cycle of Ragnarok, Thor destroyed Yggdrasil, which wiped out what remained of the Asgardians, which included Loki. Eventually Thor returned and then he rebuilt Asgard in Broxton, Oklahoma. And this basically led to him running around trying to find all the different Asgardians whose spirits had been born in mortal bodies, and Loki took the body that was meant for Sif. That's how you end up getting Lady Loki. During that time, Loki and the rest of the Asgardians lived in Broxton, Oklahoma, and Loki came across a girl, and Loki thought it would be interesting to give this girl just insane levels of magical power, brainwash her, trick her into thinking she was actually an Asgardian who had basically been banished from Asgard, and then send her out into the world just to see what would happen. And that's exactly what did happen, that he gave her these magical abilities and then sent her into the world as a banished Asgardian, and she ended up in New York. After that, she started operating under the name of Enchantress, kind of fashioning herself after the character Amora the Enchantress. Eventually, she came across the Young Avengers. This was basically a bunch of teenagers who operated as Avengers after the original Avengers team was disassembled because Tony Stark couldn't afford to bankroll them anymore. Eventually, they were sanctioned by the actual Avengers team and then became an official Young Avengers team. But during that time period, they came across Sylvie Lushton and then a handful of other characters named like Coat of Arms and the Melter, who were kind of operating as an unofficial version of the unofficial Young Avengers team, which was really kind of weird. They ended up fighting each other for a little while and then they became friends. Some of the members were selected to become part of the Young Avengers themselves, which I believe included Sylvie Lushton, and then a handful of things happened after that. She ended up becoming part of a team called Avengers Academy, which was basically an academy where the Avengers trained kids who would go on to become Avengers themselves. The whole gist behind that though, the secret thing behind it, and the Avengers never told anybody this, is the kids who were in Avengers Academy were actually most likely to become villains. And so it was really just one giant ruse by the Avengers to keep an eye on them to make sure they didn't actually become villains in the first place. Eventually Sylvie left and she got involved with a handful of other characters, so like Caroline LeFay, basically the daughter of Dr. Doom from the past who was teleported to the future. She got involved with a guy named Parker Robbins who was kind of a weird villain, had the Infinity Gauntlet at one point in time, and he formed a group called the Illuminati, not the old school Illuminati, the more modern Illuminati. And the whole point behind that was to kind of operate behind the scenes and try to conquer the world. And then eventually Sylvie met the actual Amora the Enchantress, who was pissed because she was using Enchantress's name. And so she said, okay, fine, if this is what you want to do, then she whisked her off to some like demonic version of the 10 realms and said, if you can survive life in those realms, then when you come back, you can use my name. And we haven't seen or heard from Sylvie since. So presumably she's dead. I have no real idea. But when you look at the TV show, that origin makes a lot of sense, right? It works really well. Not the Young Avengers and Avengers Academy and all that unnecessary fluff, but how it was that she was created. Whenever Loki refers to her as Loki, she hates that name. She doesn't like being called Loki. And so you could literally look at this story as it's playing out in Loki and say, okay, so this girl Sylvie is from an alternate reality. What's to say that she was truly created by an alternate reality version of Loki, but she was not supposed to exist? It's one of the things that she says in the show. The TVA has been hunting her entire life. So what if we play this out, right? What if we throw out the craziest theory we can come across, right? One crazy theory that I just want to throw out here is this theory that like Owen Wilson and the Judge are actually the timekeepers, or at least two of the timekeepers. The third one, who knows what happened there, but like, I'm gonna throw that insane theory out there. I have no evidence whatsoever to back that up. I just think it would be cool if it was true. I just think it would be awesome if it was true. But looking at this character of Sylvie, let's say that Loki in an alternate reality was not the villain that we know, right? He was a cool guy, because that's one of the things to keep in mind when it comes to alternate reality depictions of characters, especially in Marvel Comics. Just because they're a villain in the main Marvel universe does not mean they're a villain in every single universe. Sometimes they're heroes in other universes. Other times they're villains in other universes. It just kind of depends on what story we're talking about. But let's say that this version of Loki in this alternate reality was a good guy. He was a hero. And let's say that this girl Sylvie was some young person who was caught in the crossfire of some conflict, or say that maybe that version of Loki was a bad guy. This girl Sylvie died. Loki changed his ways and said, I've got to fix this girl being killed, right? In the same way that Iron Man would have done anything to keep Peter Parker from dying during the events of Infinity War. And let's say that version of Loki went back in time and basically saved Sylvie, or maybe he created Sylvie, whatever the case happens to be. Loki himself was involved in the life of Sylvie, so much so that she became the person that she is. Maybe she was just a regular person who basically was saved by Loki, but because of the fact that she was supposed to die according to the time stream, the TVA showed up and said, nope, she's got to die. We've got to reset charge this girl. She's going to be disintegrated from existence, and that's going to be the end of that. And Loki said, no, that's not going to happen, and basically sent her out, right? Just teleported her away and said, save yourself. In the same way that you see Loki teleport that little time device, right? It just disappears, reappears, what he does with his daggers, different things like that. He did the same thing with her, just sent her away, and the TVA couldn't find her, right? And so they end up just either getting rid of that version of Loki or resetting that timeline or whatever it is, but that version of Loki ends up dying. What it comes down to now is motivation. That's her motivation right there, right? It would explain why she kind of operates with the look of Loki, but doesn't like being referred to as Loki, because while she was saved by him, she is her own character. It would also explain why the TVA has been hunting her entire life, because she's not supposed to exist. She's supposed to be dead. This also explains why it is that she's running around and trying to destroy the TVA, because at the end of the day, they destroyed her mentor, father figure, the person she cared about, whatever the case happens to be. And so the result of this is she wants to bring the TVA down. It's a pretty loose and flimsy theory, I will admit. There's not a whole lot going on there, but it seems pretty basic and pretty simple. And the MCU is nothing if not that. I would like to believe there's more to her character than just a petty revenge story, that there's something much bigger going on that has to do with the TVA basically deceiving everybody, specifically the timekeepers deceiving everyone. But we also got some really cool tidbits out of this, right? One of the things that we learned that was solidified, again, it wasn't my theory, it was a theory that you guys came up with, or one that I read, but it was basically the idea that the TVA, the Time Variance Authority, all the people who work for them are basically humans. They're variants from alternate realities. Now, it again begs the question, how are they able to pull that off, right? And one of the theories you guys came up with is the Mind Stone. We know the Infinity Stones do not work in the offices of the Time Variance Authority. We know that the members of the TVA have been brainwashed to basically work for the TVA. So what's to say that along the way, they're told that these artifacts, things that could be used to potentially topple the timekeepers, don't work, right? Those are Infinity Stones. They don't work here, right? And that's why people use them as paperweights, because they don't actually know what they're capable of, because they don't know that they can use them. The biggest issue I can think of, though, when it comes to the Mind Stone theory is we know the Infinity Stones don't work in the TVA for a couple of different reasons. The first reason is because Loki was told they don't work, and then Loki tried to use them and found out they don't work. So it's not like the assistant guy was lying, but this does raise a really interesting possibility. If you look at Marvel Comics for a second, there is a story in Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, or a point in that story, when you learn that what the Council of Reeds is doing, basically this big coming together of all these alternate reality Reed Richards, is there's actually whole universes that they have that they've effectively turned into food storage warehouses. That like there's whole worlds where they grow crops, foods, resources, different things like that, and then take those things to other universes and then drop them off. It's only one step away from considering the possibility that the timekeepers do exist, assuming they're not Owen Wilson or the Judge or whoever. They do exist, and they don't live with the TVA. They exist in like their own dimension or their own reality, and they oversee, or at least partially oversee, the creation of these members of the Time Variance Authority. That whenever a variant is captured and brought in, that variant is taken to whatever that dimension happens to be, and the Infinity Stone is used there. Because when it comes to the stones, we know they don't work in the TVA, but we know that every single universe, for the most part, not everyone, but most universes have their own versions of the Infinity Stones. And if you possess the Infinity Stones in that universe, who's gonna stop you? So what stops them from grabbing variants, taking them over to that dimension or that universe where the Timekeepers reside, where they oversee this kind of transition process, and then those people have their minds wiped using the Mind Stone, and then in turn are brought to work into the TVA. It seems a lot to throw into the Loki TV show, especially to cover in a single episode. That seems pretty in-depth, and a lot of what we've seen has been pretty simple and straightforward stuff, so I doubt that's actually the case. I love the Mind Stone theory, but I don't necessarily believe that's what's going on. It's possible. It's entirely possible it's happening. It seems a little far-fetched, even when you look at what's going on with the nature of Loki and the MCU and the kind of stuff they're covering. Adding that in seems to make things a little more complicated. Anyway, this episode was filled with some pretty cool stuff, but much like we saw with WandaVision when we got to about the middle of the season, it's filler, right? This is just kind of informational stuff. It's the Empire Strikes Back equivalent of Loki, right? The TVA Strikes Back. One of the things that I really loved about this is we got to see so much personality from Sylvie, right? Like, she's not just like this cold-blooded, really crappy person who just kills arbitrarily. Honestly, I did kind of like the mysterious version where it's like, man, like this chick is wildly capable. Once you actually know who it is and you see her, she becomes a lot more tangible. And then at that point, it almost seems to kind of take away from the mystery, the intrigue, and almost the capabilities of her character. But regardless, it was cool to see that whole thing, like the conversation she had with Loki and like them talking about each other's past or what little we got about her past, all that kind of stuff. It was cool. It was interesting, right? I dug it, right? I had a good time watching it. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.